John Feldt here, and with me is Craig Edwards, Weatherwise Guys well, look at that. I got March 18th. That's not it. It's April 29th, 2024. We're going to talk about tornadoes a bit, and we're going to be talking about rain and river gauges a bit. So, Craig, I don't know if you've been watching it over the last week, but lots of severe weather activity. You can see in this slide right here, these are all the tornadoes so far in April. And if you look at this track here, we were sort of running pretty close to normal here. And then we had pretty quiet time and we came below normal. And then this popped us up. I think last I saw about 130 tornadoes last week. So I don't know, were you following those down in Florida?
Yeah, I was looking up in the Midwest, so going through Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, the big wedge tornadoes. There was certainly a large number of tornado warnings issued. Anytime you have a couplet on radar, Doppler radar that shows velocities inbound and outbound at a certain category, that you've sort of got to pull. You got to pull the trigger on a tornado warning. You don't hold off on that and say, "Well, I wish I would have pulled a tornado warning on that." So I think the warnings were well issued. The watches were well issued. So unfortunately, we get this time of the year and we get these couplets, John, as you well know, that a lot of false alarms are on those tornado warnings.
Yeah, I think what struck me is every year it seems like we have more and more pictures of these tornadoes. We have more and more storm chasers out there, and now I'm seeing drones, a lot of drones out there taking pictures. So, storm spotters were going like right into this. I don't have time to show all the pictures, but it was just amazing how close they got. I saw a train last night I was watching that got hit by a tornado. Thinking back, did you ever run into a guy named Mike Smith? I forgot the name of the company he had. He was out of Wichita, Kansas. And one of his big businesses was to provide information to trains that were on track when there was a possible tornado. That goes back to my days in Kansas. I remember that. The other thing we had was some really extreme rain. And, a couple things that stand out to me is, these little areas here, that's a rain estimate. And these are rain estimates from radar. If you look at the scale, that's 10 inches of rain in a short period of time. So we really had some flooding issues with that. This was the entire month so far. And look at all this red. That's 5 inches or more. And look at this right here. This is the next 7 days. That's sort of let's see here. That goes eastern Texas. That overlaps a good part of this. So I think we're going to be talking about agricultural season flooding with some field work delays and flash flooding. And we're going to be very soon talking about going from drought. And I'm going to work on a post on that this week, from drought to flood type situation. So what's that going to do over in your old area in Indiana, all that rain, 5 inches this time of year?
Well, the farmers welcome rain, but on their own schedule.
Yeah.
They like to have a nice dry spell probably in the middle of April where they can get the crops in and everything's seeded. Then they like to have a general rainfall, not these deluges where they wash the seeds away. So once the thing sprouts, though, the plant can hold up pretty well unless it's in a low-lying area and does get 2 or 3 inches in a short period of time. So I know that a lot of farmers like to have their agricultural crops planted in different areas of the field. That some are low spots that they'll hold up well during a dry season, but most of the fields in through the Midwest are pretty level fields, and they like to have the rain run off, and so they're looking for a gentle rainfall, preferably overnight. So hopefully all this rain doesn't come in a 2 or 3 hour period.
Yeah, one of the things I do is I try to look at the sort of the big picture, the long term, and I have been hearing that there's some issues in the Eastern Corn Belt, but I think from a season perspective, especially with these hotter summers, we're always vulnerable to more drought. So this can have an impact for the entire growing season, especially corn with, once those roots get down there into that moisture. So we're really recharging the soil moisture. And short term, we could be having issues, but long term, this could be positive. But this overlap in rain always gets me concerned, because you look at this again, Texas, eastern Oklahoma, west or eastern Kansas, parts of western Missouri up into Iowa, we're going to have an overlap of some heavy rain. So what does that do? I talked about that 10 inches of rain. Well, look at that. Here we go. We've got some flooding going on, mainly tributaries, but these smaller tributaries get 10 inches of rain. And these are the flood categories. So purple is major flooding. And that's, at least what I used to always say is, minor flooding is sort of the areas that get flooding every year, no big deal. Moderate is when you start having problems with some roads being closed and things like that. But this major flooding is a big deal. Do you remember in your career any, big major floods?
Well, of course, we had the 1993 Mississippi River flood that started up in Minneapolis area and worked its way down to the St. Louis and all the way down to the Gulf Coast. And so that was a big flood. I remember the hydrologist in charge, Dean Bratz at the time, did an interview with David Brinkley of NBC News on a Sunday morning from the weather office, talking about how this flood was going to cover a large portion of the Midwest. And then we had the floods of, I think, 1997, the Grand Forks floods, where the river level went to an unprecedented territory of over 50 feet. And so it was those were quite the two flood events. John, talk about river levels. They have different ways of measuring, and one is a staff gauge, and those are what I remember starting out my career in the 70s. They had I think we're going to you got a picture of that as we come up, John?
Yeah, I got one here. I think that's the next one. I wanted to mention to you real quick. The three big events in my career that I can think of were the Andover tornado when I just got to Topeka, Kansas, deputy meteorologist in charge. And it was like the first week. That was a big tornado. But the other two were flood events. I was the meteorologist in charge in Des Moines, Iowa in 93. And I did work with Dean Bratz at the River Forecast Center in Minneapolis. And then when I was a hydrologist in charge down in the Southeast River Forecast Center, that was my other big event. And that was Hurricane Floyd in North Carolina. So 2 out of the 3 of my big events happened to be flood events. So anyway, speaking of flooding, I'm going to get to your river gauge here. I wanted to show you that USGS operates and other agencies, but mainly the U.S. Geological Survey, all these river gauges across the country. And in this one, red is low flow, blue's high flow. And I'm sure you've seen these gauges, and I'm going to sort of pass it over back to Craig here. I don't think I have a staff gauge on here. I should have put that on there, but you want to talk a little bit about these river gauges?
Yeah, sometimes if you drive past a river that's an old city, they nailed up these boards that are on railroad crossings or on a bridge, and they would actually read the gauge like a numerical number on the gauge site, and that was just a board nailed to the bridge. Then they came up with the automated bumper systems that would give you instantaneous readouts. So in the older days, somebody would go down and read the river gauge, and sort of very distinguished person to be known. I'm the guy that reads the river gauge down there. Mm-hmm. And that, John, as you know, in the river forecasting, we try to forecast a river stage in feet. And there's also a thing called stream flow, CFS, cubic feet per second. And you're probably more familiar with that, but these gauges are very important to us to get overnight gauging information. When everybody's asleep, we can still monitor the river gauge.
Yeah, this is one of those hydrographs from East Texas that hit that real high major flooding. And these are the categories, and this is a hydrograph. So this is what the river does. And these small tributaries, when they get hit with that rain, they shoot up like a rocket. So if you were next to this tributary, boy, you better get out of the way. It's just going up here. But this is in feet. So it hit 32.2 feet. This was the record there, 36.1. And this is the USGS gauge in discharge, and this is cubic feet per second, and that's 8,000. So I went from 3,000 cubic feet per second to 8,000. Now, Craig talked about these gauges, and this is that automatic gauge, and it has a pressure here, and that goes up here, and it measures it, and then through a satellite image, it sends that reading. But like Craig said, sometimes those go out, and you got to go out there on that bridge. And I've done this a couple times myself. And this is another one. I don't know, Craig, have you ever used one of these where you open that up and you crank this thing down and a wire weight goes all the way down to the water and you can read it that way? And that's a backup. Have you ever had a chance to do that?
That was old-fashioned hydrology back then. And you went on a bridge, and it was a narrow, usually a narrow bridge, and you got trucks going on there, and you're trying to open up this box and without dropping the key from the box into the river. So you drop the wire weight down, and you can see when it first makes contact with the water, that's when you read the water height. So the thing also in the Weather Service that was sort of a complicated issue was we had flood stage is above the height of the river. We also had sea level. So I remember one gauge is specific in Minnesota. We had the river gauge was measured in sea level, and so it was like the flood stage was like 840 feet. And the people said, "Well, how can that be?" I said, "Well, that's because it's measured from the mean sea level when the river gauge was first established." They said, "Why don't you just change that? Just talk about the river height from the bottom of the river to the height of the flood stage." So most people who are concerned themselves with river stages, they're very familiar with what the flood stage is in their own community.
Yeah, if I remember right, and this goes back a long time, there was some kind of weight that went on here. And I don't know if I was an intern at the time, but you'd go out there, and I forgot how it attached, but I was always really worried that thing would fall off and sink into the water and you'd never see it. So this is actually, there you go. There's the new one right here, and here's the old one. And as Craig mentioned, sometimes you'll see this staff gauge up on a side of the bank or on a pier of the river, and that's another way. So I want to give our colleagues, I worked in my career really closely with the USGS, and they're great professionals. They're the ones that are out there in boats and on the bridges. They do a great job. So kudos to them. Um, you know, I guess I wanted to ask you as we end here, we're getting near the end here, and we could talk about this. We'll talk about a little bit more hydrology in future ones, but how's the weather down there in Fort Myers? How's your weather? I always like to check in on you.
We've had less than an inch of rain for the month of April. And we're on the brink of the rainy season where the sea breeze sets up, and we got a little bit of a boundary that forms along I-75 near Fort Myers down to Naples. So we're looking for the rainy season to kick in soon, but been a pretty dry April, so we could use some rain at this juncture down here in Southwest Florida.
Hey, yeah, I had an inch and a half of rain. I was on the eastern edge of that heavy rain band, and lakes here's running full. It's beginning to go over the blocks there, so it's been pretty wet here. We're in good shape. We've had a lot of rain, and as you saw, we have a little bit more on the way. And it looks like it's going to warm up. It's been sort of struggling to even hit 80 degrees here, so I've been sort of struggling. I'm going on a bike ride tomorrow. This might be the only day this week. It's either a cold north wind or a 30-mile-an-hour south wind or raining, so it's been hard finding time to ride a bike. So anyway, it was nice talking with you, Craig, and we'll try to catch up again.
Have a good month of May. We'll check back with you in a couple days.
Okay. So, we'll see you.
All right. Take care.